So Chris and I were actually here at this same plot a week ago doing a product training with a group of dealers, and the change in this plot in a week or less has been pretty dramatic. And Chris and I have both been getting phone calls from customers and dealers. 2 weeks ago, it looked like we probably wouldn't do much until mid-September. We were getting questions about, are we late this year? And very, very, very quickly, the crop is getting, prematurely ready to harvest. Seeing a lot of premature death in plants that are going from green to silver to brown in about a 3 or 4 day period. You dig those plants up, you split them down through the crown, you'll see a lot of root and crown rot. We're seeing a lot of anthracnose top dieback, which anthracnose can be another one of the crown rot pathogens. So between some of the foliar disease pressure we've had with tar spot, southern rust, gray leaf spot, kind of that normal, some of those normal plant pathogens, and more than normal amounts of southern rust and tar spot, combined with, some crown rot, some heat stress, a little bit of drought stress through grain fill, you see those plants that they've had that crown rot infection probably in them most of the growing season. And in my area, we're seeing it primarily at this point in the early planted corn. The later planted corn still looking healthier. Now it's got further to go, so as it gets closer to black layer, it may look the same. But right now today, it would appear as though it's the early April planted corn that's struggling the most, and that's what's really speeding towards probably a little bit of a premature black layer in some cases where that plant's just shutting down a little bit early. We will have some yield loss from that, but primarily what I'm more worried about rather than the yield is the stalk quality on that product, because before you lose yield, you're going to lose stalk quality from cannibalization. Where we've had a few windstorms, it's pretty easy to tip that stuff over. It's not snapping off or breaking off like it does with green snap. There's not really a rotten spot in that stalk, but that cannibalized stalk is just weak and it's just kinking over. It's still attached. I think in most cases we can get under it and probably get most of that crop out of the field, but it's going to be a challenge to harvest with how that stalk's kinked over.
Yeah, a couple points there that I wanted to extrapolate on. So one, as you talked about, dramatic change in the last couple weeks, and we've all seen it as we drive around, right? I mean, there's a lot of fields that look like they're ready to go. There's a lot of fields that guys, might wish they ought to be in at this point, picking them already. And as we see that top dieback kind of come in on a lot of these plants, right, you notice as you drive around a lot of fields, this is too senesced and too dead to really show up, but a lot of times you'll see the top turn brown at first, and so that's anthracnose top dieback that we talked about. And it's the same causal agent that you've got as anthracnose stalk rot. It's the same pathogen that causes both of those. And so when I start seeing the top dieback, I start to worry about yield, all right, because we're losing green leaf material that we're utilizing for photosynthesis to finish packing into the year. But I also get to worried about making that change to thinking about late season stalks, because if we've got top dieback, there's a good chance we've got stalk rot, and they kind of go hand in hand. So that's something that we need to be thinking about. I mean, as I think about this crop and the stress that it's went under the last couple of weeks, we're, to Lance said, we're kind of prematurely dying, a little bit more of an induced death. Can't help but think that's taken some off of the yield as well, right? Because we didn't finish naturally. We didn't finish off as well as we would like to think we would. And I would say there's not, in a lot of these fields, there's not just one of those things that he mentioned that's driving all of this, right? Because in almost every field, the plot we're standing in front of right now is kind of a pathologist's dream world, right? I mean, there's about every disease known to man in corn represented right here. And they're all kind of working together and in unison to help take for this crop to senesce. The other thing to think about is we've had a lot of corn earworm again this year. We've got a lot of dirty tips in some of our in a lot of our ears this year. I've been overly nervous for quite some time about ear health this fall, and luckily, I would say so far, based on what I've seen driving around, I haven't seen a lot of shucks that prematurely died that would be kind of indicative of diplodia. But if you think about the environment, we had a lot of moisture at pollination time. We had a lot of moisture after. That's kind of a perfect environment, if you will, for a lot of the ear rots. And luckily, so far, most of the ear rots we're seeing are just kind of more limited to the tips, which is kind of, insect feeding, bird feeding, the end of the tip of the ear kind of blowing out the end of the husk. And so we'll continue to have a little bit of that, but so far I'd say we're in pretty good shape on ear rot.
Those two ears you're holding there, Chris, when you look at the quality of pollination that we got, how well those ears pollinated, how little tip back there is on those ears, it's no wonder that we've got a stalk that's been under stress, a plant that's been under stress. I mean, these plants had tremendous potential. Still going to have excellent yields in a lot of fields, but when you've got a lot of ear to fill, and you get some stress during grain fill, that's when crown rot really starts to express itself, and that's when you get that stress and that cannibalization of that stalk, as that plant is trying to finish off that ear the best it can.
Yeah, one other thing I'll throw in there that I've been talking about with some folks is what I would like to think is reduce solar radiation this year. So if you think about all the rainy days we had, a lot of cloud cover, right? We had a lot of days that it was real hazy. And if you think about all the smoke that came in from some of the wildfires out west, so that's all, and that all correlates to less sunlight. And as I think about that, right, sunlight is the driver for photosynthesis that we end up harvesting at the end of the day. So if I've got less sunlight, I've likely got less photosynthesis. I've got less assimilates being produced, or less starches, less energy moving to that kernel. And when you start thinking about, some of the ear set that's out there, we've got some cannibalization going of that plant to try to help finish that ear off. But I can't help but think that reduction in solar radiation is also going to take a little bit off the yield this year as well.
I think that could be one of the bigger factors in the premature death that we're seeing, pretty broadly across central Illinois too, is you didn't have the sugar production. That plant didn't have an excess of sugar, and as sugar gets depleted in the plant, that lowers its defenses against infection from several different pathogens. And kind of a depleted plant is really free game for a lot of pathogens to infect. And I wonder if we'd had a little better sunlight, a little better sugar production, would those plants have been a little healthier, a little more able to fend off some of those infections, and would we be looking at a crop that was in better shape today? Yeah, we've lost some yield, but the first thing that plant's going to lose, even before it sacrifices yield, it's going to sacrifice itself. And that's where you get that cannibalization from, and that's really, I think, what's impacting our overall stalk and plant integrity now, and why this stuff is going down so fast.
So all that said, we probably sound a little doom and gloom, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of good things going for us. I mean, yes, I picked this guy right off the end because I wanted to talk about the ear tip and what it looked like, and talk about the grain quality. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we've got a lot going for us, and we've got tremendous potential in a lot of these fields. And so I guess the encouragement is that, and if you look at what USDA is forecasting, right, they're calling for high yields as well. So we've got a lot of things going for us. I guess the point we're trying to make is that, this crop is deteriorating quickly, and we don't truly recognize the financial win of that crop that's out there in the field until it's in the bin, right? And so we've got the potential for things to kind of get a little ugly as we go through fall, as we worry about standability and whatnot. So, yes, we've got some issues that we need to be thinking about and aware of and cognizant, and maybe changing up some of our ideas on how fast we're going to go to the field, and maybe being selective on what fields we take out first to try to help make sure we get as much of that crop that's out there that we paid for, that we grew, and let's get it into combine and in bin at the end of the day.
You and I always get lots of questions on what's known as phantom yield loss, Chris, and guy pulls into the field when it's 26% and it's doing 275. You get the field half harvested, you come back a month later when it's 16%, and that 275 is now 240, and he's wondering, where did those 35 bushels go? And I really think with the deterioration that we're seeing, the best yields we see are going to be on higher moisture corn. And as this crop dries down, we could see maybe an even bigger difference between corn at 25 or 26% than we do at 17 or 18, just because of the amount of deterioration that we're seeing in crops that are still fairly high moisture. It's not 18% corn, and we're already seeing it look kind of tough. That has us a little bit nervous for, well, if it looks like this at 28, what's it going to look like at 18? And so I guess our message is just let's get the crop in the bin. To Chris's point, it's worth a lot more in the bin than it is standing in the field. And every windstorm we get, we're seeing a little more down corn. And obviously, it's a very high yield crop. It's a good crop. It's got a high value. And a little too much field drying this year could prove to be costly.